Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Catholic Founders Podcast, where we are on a mission to empower an army of Catholic business owners so that together we can bring God back into the culture, front and center, right where he belongs. There's a lot of business content and advice out there on the internet, but none of it that helps you to run your business like Jesus would, and that's what we're trying to do here. So, today we are speaking with Drago Dimitrov, the co-founder of the Holy Habits app, and I wanted to have Drago on for three main reasons. First of all, I'm actually very much enjoying this app, Holy Habits, and I wanted him to share a little bit about how to build good habits in the first place, because as leaders of our companies, we all have a responsibility to be the best leaders that we can for our organizations. God put us in these roles for a reason, and we need to take that responsibility seriously. So not just healthy habits, holy habits, right? That's number one. Number two, connected with this idea of holy habits is the idea of pursuing the highest level of the spiritual life. So we walked through the kind of three stages of the spiritual life and how some of those particular things apply to founders and entrepreneurs and some of those unique hurdles that we have to go through. We also did, as part of this, break down the three types of entrepreneurship that correspond to those three stages. You'll hear more when you get to that part of the episode. And then thirdly, I knew that it'd be a good episode because Drago is actually a really good follow on Twitter or X. He's doing a lot of really interesting apologetics work there. So he's a very articulate person. So it was really fun to have him on. If you are enjoying this show, please do give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast player or share it around on social media. Share with your other Catholic entrepreneur friends. We're just trying to grow this. We only grow through word of mouth. So if you share it, it'll help us a lot. And then finally, if you are looking to be surrounded by other Catholic entrepreneurs and builders, consider becoming a member of the Catholic Founders Guild. It's $10 a month or $100 a year. We've priced it so that literally anybody can afford it. If you're a Catholic entrepreneur or you're looking to get started, join today just by upgrading on Substack to paid. Any paid subscription will get you in. We do vet everybody who gets in, but it's a great community of other people that you can learn from, do business with, and just be surrounded by other ambitious Catholics. All right, without any further delay, enjoy the episode. All right, welcome to the pod, Drago. How are you doing today?
Wonderful, Silas. It's great to be connected with you. I know we've chatted a little bit before, and I'm excited to talk today.
Yeah, absolutely. I got a chance to look through some of the other podcasts you've done too, and you've got a wide, how do I say, like a wide range. You can do a lot of things. I also have been enjoying your Twitter content quite a lot lately. Lots of very repostable stuff. So I guess for people who don't know who you are, just give a kind of a quick intro to who you are, what you're building, and everything.
Yeah, I'm the villain from Rocky Four. Back as a Catholic. No, yeah, my name's Drago. I'm from Bulgaria. I grew up in South Bend, Midwest, small town kind of thing. 14 kid graduating class. I like to say. Because a completely different type of world mindset growing up. Baptist, Christian, Protestant values, converted to become Catholic in college at the University of Notre Dame, which some devout Catholics say, wait, that's a Catholic university? I'm like, yeah, no, it is. It is. But, I understand why they might say that. And spent some time in New York City, did the, Wall Street investor kind of hat. I wore that. Went to business school, then put on the startup technology hat. And all this time I wanted God, I asked God to give me something that I could do to push his kingdom and use my skills. And so there's a whole journey in that. But I'm leading Holy Habits, which is the #1 Catholic habit tracking and spiritual coaching app. So it's for devout Catholics who are serious about becoming a saint. It's like the difference between Planet Fitness and Gold's Gym, when you know what you're trying to go after and you have clear targets and goals in mind. And so if you want to pursue holiness, that's what we're for.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I really like that description. Man, that's a really good way of understanding it. Like anybody who's serious about it, they're gonna need specific tools. They're gonna be, in figuring out what kind of supplements they want, all that stuff, right? And this is a good place for it. So I have
Yeah.
been working on trying to get the hang of the app lately. It's not so much. It's actually very very simple to use. It's just a matter of like there's so much good content in there. You have to really commit a bit of time to it, and I like that. I'll get deeper into it, obviously, but I am a happy member so far. But yeah, tell me a little bit more, guys. I guess why, like, how did you come to decide to build that? Like, what's the specific origin of this? Because you mentioned that you were looking for something specifically meaningful, in your tech career, and then this is how it came about.
Yeah. So I'd say there's like two movements undercurring, one that I was perceiving, then one that was happening in the background. What I was perceiving was when I was at Chicago booth, I had a buddy, and he was a Hindu guy actually, but he's a smart guy, and he's like, hey, I have a really strong Catholic friend. You really should get connected with him. And that's Nathan Pinto in Dallas. And so then we just developed a friendship. We would, from the first call, we talk like an hour. We get into all these deep conversations. So there's seeds of a friendship just years ago through business school, through a connection that were planted, while I also knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And in fact, I had another startup, and that startup, it hasn't panned out, and that there's its own story there. But while I was trying to find the right entrepreneurial venture, I was then consulting, because you have to make income and keep doing things. But yeah, stayed in prayer. And look, like again, I grew up in the small Christian school. At some point, I wanted to be a pastor. I enjoy apologetics, as you've seen on X, and so it's like, man, it's like, God, I'd really like to spend my time, if I could somehow align my vocation with things that are saving souls and spreading the gospel in different ways, that would be great. But your will be done. And so that's kind of my frequency that I was trying to tune into. But then in the meantime, Nathan, my co-founder, he is close with Dan Burke. Dan Burke, he's like arguably the world's leading authority in spiritual direction, if not whatever, top 3, top 5. And I mean, he runs spiritualdirection.com. He runs Avila Institute, used to be president of EWTN News, like a heavyweight. This guy knows his stuff. And so they started Seek Direction. This was about 3 years ago. And that's a matchmaking service where you find a spiritual director. So you can, maybe you want a director who knows the Bible really well. Maybe you want someone with a sense of humor, whatever it is. You find a spiritual director. I mean, some people say, oh, is this like a dating matchmaking? I mean, sure, but you shouldn't date your spiritual directors.
Definitely not.
But what we saw there was huge supply-demand gap. Like, demand is huge, no marketing spent. People found the website. You had 1,000 people on platform matching with the director, and we have a network of 300 directors. So a lot of demand, low supply. So, well, it's going to take time to increase the supply of directors. So what can you do instead? Can you use technology to open up the spectrum of accompaniment such that, before Holy Habits, you have two extremes. You have high touch accompaniment, which is like you have your spiritual director, and not everyone's ready for that, by the way, but that's the really important stuff. You have your spiritual director, or you have this lone wolf, low touch, where it's like, it's just me reading my books. And that's good. Like, I mean, I do that. But what if there's a low touch or kind of middle, on the spectrum there, where you have this guided tools and personalized spiritual journey prompts and different things going on that can guide your attention towards your next step to sainthood. And given where technology's at, there's so much room for innovation there. And so Holy Habits sits in that. And it also lets you connect with your spiritual director as well. And so that's kind of how the need emerged. And I'll just say, last thing, there's a broader, if I may say, like a zeitgeist in culture, even secular culture, where people are tired of the nihilistic, hopeless prescription of meaninglessness that society has to offer. People want the challenge. They want to grow in virtue. You see it with all of the macro optimizations. What are my steps? How many calories am I burning? What's my nutrition, my glucose, heart rate, sleep cycles, whatever. Okay, but in the spiritual life, there's been a big gap there. And so all of these things were kind of converging, and then it just became obvious and clear that this is what we needed to do.
Yeah, interesting. That point about people seeking something, I guess you say challenging or hard, it's definitely come to. I follow a lot of the Silicon Valley type people, like not necessarily like the big tech bros, but all of the people who are doing kind of like just internet stuff in general, like the My First Million crowd. And all of these guys, when they sell their company, they're just like, all right, like I need something. Like, and they usually go on do these ultra marathons, or there's that one company that's allowing you to climb Mount Everest in locally just by going up it, up a certain hill like 1,000 times or whatever. And people just want something hard, something challenging. I'm curious, this maybe, I don't want to get too sidetracked here, but I am curious if you have a perspective on how soon do we actually think that desire for more will end up leading towards an acceptance of the spiritual side, especially with the God, right? Because there's a lot of like kind of weird spiritual stuff, especially in San Francisco. But how soon do you think it's going to actually move towards people realizing that there's something that's not being fed in their soul from a spiritual perspective?
Yeah, what does it say? The four transcendentals are truth, goodness, beauty, and oneness. And so really, someone's attraction or journey to God is going to hit one of those buckets more than the others, maybe a combination of both. So, for each one of those verticals, if we're like truth, right? If you want intellectual crispness and sharpness and arguments, well, you're seeing a huge flourishing and resurgence in like the Catholic internet presence and debates. You have so many Protestants converting. For example, you also have atheists running out of things. There's only so many combinations on denying the faith, and those are essentially, reaching their end of life. So there's a real resurge in truth. Beauty, of course. I mean, this is just like the awe, the wonder that you feel if you're looking at something that's so much vaster and greater than you. You go to the sunset at the edge of the cliff with the mountain range. You mentioned Everest, and so there's the pull of the heart, the upward inclination, and that's a little harder to describe in words. But some people just intuitively feel that need, and maybe it's a life situation that evokes that within them. And of course, goodness. Seeing the evil, the absence of good, sometimes helps you then realize the existence of good. By seeing how terrible things are, that points, well, wait, that means I have some understanding that there is a good. Or if you experience the goodness and love of another, and you want to deep and pursue that love, your ultimate end. And of course, oneness, just somehow being integrated, unified. And I will say, even as a Catholic, when I became a Catholic, and this was now like 9 years ago, sometimes people feel like their life is fragmented. This is what I'm like at work, this is with my friends, this is my family and faith, politics, whatever. But the deeper you kind of go into Catholicism, it's like this vortex that unifies and connects everything and just makes sense of everything. So there's different poles, and yeah, I guess individually for the archetype of like a founder who's like, now what? Which one of those factors might pull them? I suppose there's different stories that could be told, but I would say usually it's kind of maps along one of those four dimensions.
Big shout out to Verso Jobs for sponsoring this show. Joe and the team at Verso Jobs have built an incredible company that helps Catholic founders hire people who are actually aligned with your mission. They have built this incredible gamified and data driven platform that helps you hire people who actually share your mission and values. And the best part is, it's built by Catholics. So whether you're hiring for your startup, school, parish, or nonprofit, Verso makes it easy to find mission aligned talent that's ready to build the kingdom. Just visit versojobs.com to get started. That's Verso, VERSO jobs.com. To the heights. That's really interesting. I guess do you think that part of it, the reason why we're seeing this kind of move to the right, or I guess you say lots of conversions happening right now, is that due to the fact that just kind of natural cycles have played out with on a combination of levels here? Like the internet has been around long enough that people have started to kind of get to the bottom of these arguments. Like they're running out of, like you said, bullets, and eventually they need to like say, okay, maybe I'll accept Catholicism. But on the other side, you've got this kind of utilitarian, like we're just going to do everything for the sake of utility and nothing for beauty. And now people are like, hey man, I'm really getting sick of this. Like I want to see some beautiful architecture again. Like all of these things are kind of
Hmm.
coinciding, where it's like people are now able to recognize the four transcendentals. Because I've always wondered this. Like I've always had some sort of like tug in me, and I've noticed it. Again, I was raised Catholic, so maybe that's part of it. But how do people, like, what does it take for them to actually have the silence there where they're willing to recognize it? Like, is that something that can be manufactured, or does it just naturally happen in people's lives, like if they're willing to hear it?
Yeah, that's a tricky question in the sense that it kind of gets to the whole free will versus kind of subconscious causality kind of thing, right? Like what, leads me to desire silence in the first place. If my environment is surrounded by distraction and cues, things that my mind deems are worthy of attention, even though they might not be, will I ever be prompted to pursue the silence? Or will it take, I mean, usually, right, it takes some kind of disruption in our routine. Maybe it's some crisis, maybe it's a failed relationship, a health, I mean, whatever it is. So often, we don't want it to come to that, but usually requires something to interrupt the pattern that then forces us to reflect a little bit, or to find ourselves in the place between places. I think C.S. Lewis said this. So that's like, if you're at an airport where like there's nothing to do there, I mean, unless maybe you're working. So yeah, it's a great question, and that's probably the big danger today, is that do we even create the space to let us notice the winds of God's grace, or do we just occupy it mindlessly just because we feel like we have to?
Yeah. I mean, it's very difficult right now because the just a pure amount of distractions is insane. I was actually just thinking about this the other day. I was like, how can somebody who has signed NDAs remember not to say certain things because there's just so many things in their brain? Like, how can they remember that they've even signed that and not share certain things? Like, again, if this is something you deal with on like a regular basis, but there's so much going on. I think we should. maybe put it, unless you have another thought you want to add there.
Well, I was just gonna say, but I do agree with you, and I know that opens up a whole other can of worms. But I agree with you that tradition to modernity, the late stages of capitalism, post Enlightenment period. I mean, you have all of these macro movements for sure, in conjunction even with things like Pope Leo the 13th, prophecy of the 100 year of Satan, 100 year reign of Satan, and all of that. I mean, gosh, there's so many things you could point to on a macro scale. I mean, that are borderline eschatological, and I think that's something a dynamic as well. But I know that opens up a whole nother can of.
Yeah, I will say one last thing on this that I've kind of reflected on a tad bit recently is that we tend to be very excited, especially as Catholics right now, seeing the wave of conversions, seeing kind of a more conservative movement, if you will. But there's a lot of, I do think we have to be hesitant and cautious and guard against the possibility of just the conservative without God movement, right?
That's a big
Very,
problem. Yeah.
very right-leaning people without God. That is likely to take hold. And even as more conversions happen, I actually think that because of that, we will see a lot more persecution in the church, right? So it's something for all of us to be on guard with and really arm ourselves with understanding the faith, understanding maybe you could say like the emotional regulation when things get bad. Because somebody pointed out to me the other day, there has been, and I believe this is confirmed, like there has been more martyrs or more, killings of Catholics in these 2 centuries, in these past 2 centuries, first and 20th century than of all the rest of history combined. Like it's very very large numbers. So we don't think about this because we don't see it, right? So yeah.
Yeah. No, completely agree. And one mental model that's helped me when how I've tried to think about it is, if reality, if there's the two poles of my will be done and God's will be done, which is ultimately, God and the Luciferian spirit throughout history, and that's the battle, right? Which philosophy is going to win out? Maybe it's been a little more like nuanced, and a lot of people are in the middle. But I think what's happening is it's almost like quantum physics, where is it a one or a zero? It's indeterminate, and then it pops, and you have like the
Mm,
separation of the sheep and the goats, the wheat and the chaff, all this stuff. So I think we're increasingly getting to like a collapse point where, yeah, those who are being drawn to the church will be drawn, and they will pursue God's will. And then those will be
mm.
further hardened and enticed, the opposite. So I think you are seeing this clear convergence. And then when it becomes clear, for sure, persecution can be more easily targeted as well.
Mm. That's a very interesting observation that it'll effectively become binary at some point because it's a little messy now, but then it will become more like me versus you type of things. That's again, we could talk about this probably a long time. We'll try to focus on the habit stuff today. I did want to get your take on what are the core things that, again, this isn't, it's not specifically for Catholic entrepreneurs per se, but
Yeah.
just for people. How do you actually build holy habits? What are the kind of core components that you need to have in place to be able to do this successfully, just as a base level here?
Yeah. Well, for starters, when we talk about habit, I mean, right, what's the habit? And we understand, okay, it's a behavior, it's something that's internalized, it's like a somewhat permanent disposition in my will, so that, I might want something, but then if I do it, does it feel easy or hard? Well, when it's a habit, there's less friction. It feels easier to slide in and do the action that I want. So the habit. Now, how do we set habits? How do we even, engage in habits? I mean, if we just bridge it back, I mean, this is kind of turning into a philosophical podcast, isn't it? But existentially, I start with my senses right here, right? Like I'm receiving a visual. I see my room, my environment. There's sound. I hear your voice speaking to me. I'm being inundated with data, with stimulus and perception in my environment. Now, there's a lot going on, but part of my environment will cue me, right? I think certain things are important. And then with each cue, there's a trigger or there's a story that I connect. There's a if-then expectation with the cue. So, for example, wake up, check the phone. Like maybe that's a
Hmm.
thing that people do, right? Or like, brush my teeth and, and then walk out to sit down and have coffee, or like whatever, right? So there's a causal sequence that we've mapped in our stories. So for habit building, oftentimes the first step is really cue design, where you look at what are the different triggers and what do I want to attach to that. Let me take a step back here for a second. If you want to kind of design your life in some sense, you have to play both the role of a director and an actor. So when you put on your director hat, you need to take inventory first of what are the different reels and stories that I currently believe in my life, my identity, my vocation, who I want to be. And then what is the story I actually want to be? Like, I'm, this diligent entrepreneur. I'm a father who protects his family, whatever the goal is, the identity you want to embrace. And then you think, okay, now in my ordinary day-to-day logistics of life, how do I hook that story into those cues through tiny little incremental actions, right? So you don't say, oh, I'm going to pray an hour every day. If you don't pray anything, you say, well, like 3 minutes. And you attach that to a cue. So for example, okay, every day, like I'm putting my son to sleep. That's a repetitive action that already exists in my flow. Now I'm going to hook that. When I put my son to sleep, then I will pray the daily examen. I'll pray the Our Father. When I touch the doorknob, I will say, oh, come Holy Spirit. If I pull out my wallet, I will then remember to offer my day, to the Lord, whatever it is, right? So to build habits, I mean, concretely, you have to find the cues that exist in your current life. And you have to decide as a director, what stories do I want to orchestrate? And then you have to be the actor, right? So now you first you have to imagine the story, like this is what it's going to be, but then you have to perform it. Life is the stage, right? And so, you don't get points for thinking the good thoughts. You get points for living out the life, building the virtue. And so then you have to, once you've assigned yourself the script, you have to be the actor that executes the script that you've put together.
Interesting. That's really good. So this is bringing me back to having read Atomic Habits. Is like you anchor in something that's existing, and then you say, I'm going to make a conscious effort to then add something to that. It's kind of like I think they call it habit stacking in that one, where it's like, hey,
Yeah.
this is something I already do, not necessarily intentionally, but I wake up, and when I do wake up, what do I do next, right? And you kind of can go from there. So that's the basis of getting started. Beyond that, then I
Yeah.
guess is there any other thing once you've decided, okay, here's my anchor point, you figure out how to hook it in as the director, and I guess it's worth noting as a director, you have to first make the decision as Catholics. I'm trying to get to heaven, right? And how do I
That's
get there?
right.
How do I become like a saint? And then you kind of reorient it. But once you've done that, once you've kind of started to get these, how do you stick with it? How do you actually remember it? Because I have personally tried my best to find ways that there's like I want dozens of opportunities throughout the day to remember to just like say, hey, God is present with me. And I've had ideas on how to do that, but I've never remembered like
Yeah.
these anchor points. I've never remembered them the first or second time to get it going. That's a hard part for me.
Yeah, this goes back to with the cues, right? So if I'm not remembering, then can I put uh, strange objects in my environment that aren't typically
Mhm.
there? So, maybe if I don't have a crucifix next to my bedstand, okay, I put that there. So my mind is going to notice because, oh, that's different. And then, okay, when I see the crucifix, maybe I've associated a behavior with, okay, I'm going to pray the Our Father. I'm going to spend some time in mental prayer, maybe thank Christ about 7 things, like whatever the habit is. And so, I mean, right, or sticky notes. So, I mean, obviously with our app, one of the benefits is since, we're on this, here's me shaking my hand with a phone that's not there, but, we have the phone, which shows how reflexive that is. We have our phone. So what we do is, well, we'll buzz your phone. It'll go, bzz, like, okay, I got a text message. Oh, the text message says, hey, here's your holy habits that you said you do. So like we do try to make it easier and create some cues for you. And we have the accountability as well, because there's a social cues of like your friend is now seeing what you're doing and nudging you. So
Yeah.
we do try to help layer those cues in, but yeah, certainly there's a strategy to kind of displace and create novelty in your
Yeah.
existing
The
environment.
accountability one is really easy for me because like if I was raised that you have to keep your words. It's like if I tell some people I'm gonna do something, like by golly, I'm gonna do it. I don't care if it's midnight, like I'll make it happen. So no, I appreciate that one. So that's good. I think that's a good primer. And obviously I'm sure there's a lot more resources people can go deeper if they check out the app. So this episode of Catholic Founders is sponsored by FIO, the streaming platform built for Catholic creators and audiences. Think Spotify, but exclusively with Catholic content. And you know what caught my attention about FIO is it's not just another streaming service. They're actually solving how Catholic business owners reach engaged, faithful Catholic audiences who are actively seeking content that's aligned with their beliefs. And right now they've got a very special offer. They're offering free advertising space for Catholic entrepreneurs. No risk and no commitment. This is your chance to reach Catholics that you cannot find anywhere else. Just head to fio.fm/ads. That's fio.fm/ads to sign up for this free advertising opportunity. The FIO app is available on iOS and Android, with web coming soon. All right, back to the show. I do want to ask you this. Obviously, we've got a group of entrepreneurs listening to this and builders. There's this thing that you and I talked about a little bit before when we met. is the three stages of the spiritual life. So I want
Yeah.
to talk about this from the perspective of an entrepreneur. So I think why don't we do this first?
Yeah.
Lay out what are the three stages of the spiritual life that you're referring to, kind of the origin, and then what each of them looks like, and then we'll go a little bit further into there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So we have saints in the church. We have individuals we recognize who have achieved the union with God, the spiritual marriage, however you want to call it. You know, they're just 100% love effectively. They have, through cooperation with God's grace, trained themselves to say yes to God's will in more or less everything that they do. And maybe not completely perfect, but we notice that. And so just like you study the Olympic athletes, you study the people who are excellent in any domain, the church has paid very close attention to the sanctifying journey that the saints go on. And they've mapped it out. And, this is the domain of, some call it spiritual theology, mystical theology, moral theology. There's different terms, but it's all the same. It's mapped out. And so, you do see attempts like Saint Teresa of Avila's interior castle. You see Saint John of the Cross. There's many different ways it's been approached, but what the church is kind of consolidated on as a framework, generally speaking, is the three-stage framework, which has the purgative stage, the illuminative stage, and the unitive stage. Now, it's simpler to talk about it in a sequence, but the caveat is sometimes we fluctuate between them. Maybe we're straddling, we're doing two at once. These things aren't linear, but it's good to think about it linear in the same way that when a baby is born, they become a child, they grow into maturity, a teenager, an adult. So is our faith life. And so we start, pre-conversion, that's someone away from God. Once they are baptized, they are now a spiritual child. And even the Bible says in Hebrews, and I think in Corinthians, that you're drinking the milk, right? But at some point you need the meat. So even in the Bible, there's a clear progression there. So the first step is the purgative way. And this is the primary goal of the purgative way, is to free yourself from habitual sin, which obviously starts with the big ones, the mortal sins, right? Because it is not God's desire or plan for us to be stuck in a holding pattern, confessing the same sins over and over again, where 10 years later I'm still struggling with the exact same thing, and look, if that happens, God's mercy is there, so we should never feel despair about it, but we should maybe feel if God wants us to embrace the hero's journey of becoming a saint, because he does. And so the purgative way is, freeing from habitual sin. Of course, that then leads to venial sins, or even the affections of sin, right? Because, the first part of that is, okay, I don't want to sin. But the second part is, I'm not sinning, but I kind of begrudging. I look at those people and they're living a hedonistic life, and oh, that would be kind of fun. It's like this weird thing where I'm not sinning, but I have this weird attachments. So that's kind of like the deeper phase of the purification. And, while doing that, of course, we have to be in prayer with Christ, because that's how we receive the nourishment and the ability to overcome the sins. And once you get to the illuminative way, sin is no longer really bearing you down. Now it's about achieving perfection in the virtues and really, love and goodness, and even ascetical practices, right? So maybe you're more vigorous in your fasting. You're more vigorous in detaching from the comforts and other things that get in the way from our experience and that silence with God. And ultimately, I mean, look, I would say 95%, right? Or most Catholics are on stage one, purgative stage, illuminative stage. And once you get to unitive stage, I mean, that's like almost like subconscious, like easy flow, mystical experiences with God. And really what we're talking about here is a progression towards the infused contemplation of the mysteries of Christ. And I know I'm throwing a lot of theology, and we'll bridge it to the practical entrepreneurship side, but that's the framework.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to try to recap this a tad, make a couple points here to make sure I've got this right, and you correct me if I've missed it. So
Sure.
number one is recognizing that this is. So I would say the first thing is we need to recognize that there are levels, because it's the same thing. Like some people, they know how to read,
Yeah.
but do they know how to speed read? And I think people forget that there's even other levels to how quickly and how well you can read. It's the same thing with the spiritual life. It's not just am I Catholic or am I not? It's how well am I living my faith, right? So there's levels is the first recognition, and recognizing that it's not always 1 2 3, it's 1 2 2 1, like back and forth, like where we're constantly kind of going through this, and the objective being unitive, which is effectively imitating the saints, like to an actual, like very very extreme extent, as close to being perfectly united with God on earth as possible. And I'm gonna try to, if that's correct so far.
Yep.
Is that good? Okay. So
Yeah.
then I'm gonna try to make this a little bit tangible to see if this fits. Would you say that the purgative state, the first state, basically if somebody's in that state, they are no longer willing to commit mortal sin for the world, for like,
Well, what when you're in the illuminative stage, then at that point, you don't commit mortal sin. I mean, you would prefer death over committing mortal sin by the time you get to the illuminative stage. So, but yeah, certainly, I mean, while you're in the purgative stage, yeah, it starts with the desire. Hey, God, I don't want to commit mortal sin anymore, but I need your grace. Okay, I stumbled. And when you stumble, there's a sincere like reflection of like, why did I stumble? And here's what I will change so that I don't enter the same occasion of sin,
okay.
so that I don't, it's too late. If you're already doing the deed, it's too late. You want to think, what were the 2 steps before that led me to that? So,
Okay, so it's basically a point where it's like I am actively committed to purging sin from my life. I'm definitely not free from it at this point, but I'm actively committed to purging mortal sins specifically from my life.
yeah.
So then the illuminative stage would be you do not commit mortal sins, like it's not something you deal with, but you're then actively trying to kind of undo or avoid the venial sins, correct?
Yeah, well, yeah. So it's kind of the venial thing kind of straddles both. Like the end of the
Okay.
purgative is kind of where you're now really focusing on venial. And yeah, venial sins will always have some, so for sure. But then, so there's mortal sin, there's venial sin, and then there's imperfections, right? So however you want to think about it, but it's like the big rocks. And when I remove the big rocks, I start noticing all the little rocks, and then I notice the other things. So, but we can't really notice the small things when we have the big things.
Okay. And then again, the final piece is unitive. That's basically like, hey, I have achieved a certain level where, I'm constantly aware of God's presence in my life.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, even if something seems challenging or negative, I'm willing to and actually enjoying accepting those things because I know that God gave them to me. Is that also a fair characterization?
Well, that last part of accepting and sacrifice, and that I'd say is presence in all of them. Even like in the purgative stage, right? There's the active purgation where I'm actively, wrestling with the sin. Then there's the passive where that's where life throws crap at me, but that itself can purify my attachments if I offer it up to God. So even early on, that disposition of embracing suffering, that's essential even from the get-go, like early
Mhm.
on. But for sure, yeah, the deeper you go, the more it becomes automatic and a joy, like a
Okay.
joy of suffering. Yeah, for
Got it.
sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now I want to tie this to entrepreneurship. So
Yeah.
I'll just make one quick reflection and then I'll ask you to kind of dive into this. So I just was able to do what the time of recording this, I just finished this yesterday, but it'll come out a couple weeks later. I just reviewed the first 25 episodes of Catholic Founders and, kind of looked through the core lessons of each. And one of the core themes that stuck out in many of the episodes was this idea that our objective, and this is again just for everybody, not just entrepreneurs, but especially as entrepreneurs, our objective should be to become total vessels of what God wants, right? We're not
Yeah.
doing our will, we're doing God's will. Because if we remove our will from the equation, God can usually take our natural skills and then multiply it by like a million, right? And he can do so much more through us. So that's what we should be as entrepreneurs thinking about. We should be thinking about how can we become purified as much as possible so that God can use us as his instruments in the world, right? Now, after that reflection, from your perspective, how do you think that some of these things we've talked about, these three levels, if you will, really kind of come into the life of an entrepreneur? Whether it's like, I don't know if you want to connect it to stages of building a company or how you just see it kind of like really show up in its way. If you're a Catholic, you're genuinely pursuing heaven and you're an entrepreneur, are there any particular ways that you can connect these things?
Yeah, well, before going into the direct personal implementation, I will say a useful analogy, even if people are still saying, what are these 3 stages? But the entrepreneurial parallel is like, well, purgative stage 1 is like, you can't scale a business if the foundation is broken. And
Hmm.
so, you can't have toxic debts in your soul. And you have to set that up. Illuminative stage 2 is like, okay, I've got a good business. Now I'm optimizing. Now we're really kind of getting things going. And then, the unitive, the ultimate stage is like, I've aligned the company like with a higher purpose, where even, I'm willing to sacrifice some lower things because, the greater purpose. But specifically, like as an entrepreneur, what does this look like? Well, I like what you're saying about God's will versus your own will. So we have a unique challenge where in our organizations with people, I mean, you're the CEO, it's your will. I mean,
Hmm.
so you're so used to my will be done as far as leading your organization, compared to when you're working for someone else where that's more of a deferential, what's the other person's will. So it's a blessing of leadership, but it's also an added challenge where we like to control things because we kind of have to. Like, who's going to make the decisions? Like, no one's going to make things happen for your company if you're not going to do it as an entrepreneur. So in that sense, yeah, you have to make all these decisions. And if we're not careful, we then forget about God's role in providence and leaning on him. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing to watch out for is the temptation for pride to creep in, a disordered attachment to excellence. And so, I mean,
So
God for sure has been throwing that in my face as something to work on. And, you know, I will say the image he's been giving me recently is, when did God part the Red Sea? He parted it right when the Israelites were like there, you know, like chariots are about to, you know, breathing down their neck, and there's the water, the doom is, they're facing, and then God parts it. You know, God could have a mile out, you know, when they're on the hill or whatever it is, and they look at the sea and like, oh, cool, you see it's parting, like awesome. There's a pre-parted Red Sea. I know 5 steps ahead. I'm going to walk through it. It's going to be great. No, like God wants to be the shepherd and we're the sheep, and the sheep have no clue what the next 3, 4 steps are. It's like one step at a time, baby. And I think any entrepreneur, you know, who's been in it long enough has had the moments of staring at the abyss, and you know, and then things, you know, God willing, right? He just ties things together, and that way only he can get the glory. So I can't say it was because of my brilliance, ingenuity. Look at my decision making, you know. And so that, I think that's one of the hardest challenges as an entrepreneur.
yeah, that's a really good point. I have to write this down. It's not because of me. So this has come up again many times in the pod. It's like recognizing and giving all the glory to God, because He gave us the skills, He gave us the desires, and He gave us the, I guess you could say, craziness of willing to try to pursue these things, and He will guide us. I just wonder here, you know, if we can. I'm trying to figure out different ways to connect this here of
Yeah.
if you're saying that we have to be, as the CEOs, making the decisions, which we do. So on one hand, we have to be willing to take the responsibility that God gave us. He put us in these situations. So we're not saying don't make decisions. We're also not saying that you should over spiritualize and be like, hey, I can't do anything because God didn't tell me what to do, right? Because
No,
God
yeah.
is almost always going to tell you, and He gives you skills and knowledge and experience that you can pull from. But it becomes easier if your core pursuit is heaven. If your core pursuit is a life of virtue, then my assumption would be that the business decisions are a little bit easier to make. Would you agree with that?
It's a absolutely. It's a important step that, look, a lot of people don't even do step one in prudence, which is just ask what is the right thing to do. Like if you just ask that question and then allow your brain to brainstorm and say, okay, I'm making this decision for my team members or for servicing our clients, because, and just even asking, how do I honor God with this, that itself like is a huge, you know, it's like 80-20 rule, like that itself is the huge sprint. The fact that we're even, you know, dedicating that thought, because it's literally just forcing yourself to think those thoughts and reflect, that then offers your business activities to the Lord. Yeah, like you said, it's not just sitting around waiting for like God to beam in the idea necessarily, right? It's that. And so I will say, even though I talked about the pitfalls of pride as an entrepreneur, we also have unique opportunity that others don't have to exercise the virtues of justice, giving
Mhm.
people what they're owed, courage and fortitude, you know, when things are uncertain, temperance, and again, yeah, prudence, this decision making that we have to do every day. It's kind of a force amplifier. There's greater challenges, but greater opportunities for virtue as an entrepreneur as well.
Yeah, so this is a great observation. One thing I want to, I guess, point out here is that we can kind of, in a similar way, you gave an example of the entrepreneurial journey for these three kind of parallels. I'll put it in a different perspective of the business types and the business pursuit. So a lot of people start out wanting to be an entrepreneur because they want to make some money, right? They see, you know, somebody's got a Lamborghini and they want one too, or whatever, or they're just sick of being poor. And in my case, that was my thing. I did not
Sure.
want to not have money, right? I wanted to be able to help my family. So you set out to try to make a buck. And if you look at the stories, we mentioned it earlier, there's a lot of people who have made a buck and they're like, well, that was unfulfilling. Like, I'm happy that I succeeded.
Mm.
I'm glad that I've done this, but I probably started out with the wrong intentions. I'm trying to prove somebody wrong or whatnot. And I
Yeah.
think that that's kind of like the purgative stage. That's like level one
Mm.
of Catholic entrepreneurship is I'm just doing it because for the money, whether it's like for a good reason or not. If it's like, hey, I'm trying to provide money for my family, that still in my mind kind of falls into the level one, and we could debate this. It falls into level one of why am I doing entrepreneurship. The second level would be I'm doing this because I want to do good in the world, right? And there may be some ego still attached to that, but you're attaching it to some kind of beneficial thing. So it's definitely better than the first. You're not just there to make money. You have kind of you've tied the incentive of making money along with achieving, you know, something good in the world, helping people, helping poor people, whatever it is. Tim Connors had some great examples of this on the episode we did with him. That would be, in my mind, the second level. And then the third level, the unitive level, is like, hey, I believe that I'm called to entrepreneurship,
Mm.
and God has given me these skills. They're not for me. there for me to be an instrument of him. And I'm imperfect, but I'm trying my best to really be his instrument in the world. And I'm just going to go do the things that I feel called to. Whether or not I make money is kind of besides the point. This to me is how I would kind of structure this. And that, what I've just described as the third point, is a sort of entrepreneurship that used to exist in
Mm,
I don't actually know what time, but it was called ecclesiastical ventures, where monks and priests and just people of goodwill, they didn't have to be Catholic, but usually the founders were. They would set out to provide for their communities, and with the intention of being, they actually they ordered things backwards, at least to us in the current capital structure,
yeah.
that we are going to help each other get to heaven. We're going to bake into our daily schedule at work. We're going to bake into prayer, mass, all these things. And the objective is to help everybody in this business or in this venture to get to heaven. If we make money, is in God's hands. We don't have like, we're going to try our best, obviously. We're going to give excellence to it, but we're not going to be only focused on the money aspect. And they would even go as far as saying, and I don't want to spoil it because we are going to have somebody on to talk about this, but they would even go as far as saying like the director of the company might make less than the most lowest person in the company, experience skill wise, because maybe the lowest person in the company, maybe they're the janitor and maybe they have 10 kids, right? They need more money than the director. The director might be retired and have, they don't need much, right? That to me would be the like kind of like the precipice of entrepreneurship types. I'm going to pause there and get your comments.
Yeah, no, you phrased that great. I mean, you mapped that out. Yeah, I mean, what is that like the guilds or like the back, yeah,
Hmm.
mercantile system? Like, for sure. I think instrumentality, you mentioned being an instrument. And so for sure, the more, I mean, literally, we're just being a vessel. And it's not, I choose to be an entrepreneur because I have this fantasy of entrepreneurs are awesome and they have this kind of personality. And that's me. That's going to be me. I'm going to do this. It's like, no, I'm receiving that God wants me to do this vocation. And I'm just as willing to forego it if God starts pulling me somewhere else. So, God, letting God be the director of my life and playing and acting out whatever roles he's assigns me, rather than assigning myself the role that I thought I wanted. So, I mean, obviously, these things always take discernment, and the best way to discern these things is to have a spiritual director accompany you, for sure. So, yeah, these are great
And
points. Yeah,
yeah, we definitely, I think that's a very underrated point, is having a spiritual director as a company leader, because you're not just a leader. I mean, even if you're doing a solo business, I guess it's fine. It's a little less important, but if you're a leader of people, of employees, you have a really big responsibility. And I think it's even more acute in the age of AI, where there's going to be so many ways that we are faced with, moral challenges that
yeah,
may not necessarily appear to be moral challenges on the surface, but we have to have the spiritual maturity to recognize those and to hold the line, right? It's the same thing with like pro-life causes. We can't be willing to bend the line on these things. There is a line and we cannot cross it, and we need to hold that line for the public. And it will be the same thing with human dignity in work. And I think that because it's not necessarily, taking a life, we sometimes think that they're not really the same level. It's not the same gravity. I mean, I guess it is to an extent true, but it is actually very grave that we have to maintain the dignity of the worker, because we are created in the image and likeness of God's. Just an interesting perspective there,
yeah.
to think about.
Well, yeah. Well, to add to that, in business school, I forget if it was Clayton Christensen or some guy who writes the management books. There's a principle that struck me. I never thought about it till I heard it then. Management is the most noble of all professions. I'm like, well, that sounds kind of self-serving for these other business schools to say that, but what role has more influence on a person's day of, oh, I had a good day or a bad day? Oh, well, my boss or like my work, right? Like whatever that was, like that has such a huge impact on people's quality of life. Because they spend most of their days, if you're working, obviously there's different situations, but so as an entrepreneur, that role, that noble role of really impacting people's lives, because that's how they come home to their families, the interactions that you, in the environment that you nurture, that's going to influence how they go back out into their own life. So yeah, there's a great responsibility there.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I work in recruitment, and I can tell you firsthand that people will leave jobs because of bad bosses. They'll take pay cuts. They'll do anything it takes to get out of working for a bad boss,
Mm.
and they will refuse massive pay raises to go work for somebody that they're like, I don't know, like maybe they seem like a good person, but I love my boss. Like I love my manager. I love the person that I work with because they elevate me. They help me learn. They respect me. It's actually very simple, honestly. I think a lot of people, there's all these like, talent retention, gurus out there, but it's like, hey, just treat your people with love, right? It's pretty simple. Like
Yeah.
have their interest in mind, and they're not going to leave you. They're going to be very happy. They're going to tell people about your business. You're going to have a much easier time recruiting. You'll never need my help because they'll tell everybody to come work for you. So this is a very interesting point of just like recognizing that the virtues are not just something that's like, hey, this is worth striving for. They're literally a superpower in building your business. And again, you should not pursue virtue just for the sake of having a better business. You should do it because it's the right thing, but it does have positive consequences, if you will. So, man, this is good. We hit some nice stuff here, some juicy stuff. We've got time for a couple more things. I want to ask you about a little bit about your journey specifically with entrepreneurship. Like how has God kind of brought you closer to Him or taught you things through your journey of entrepreneurship?
Yeah, it's been one of the greatest blessings. There's like I'll give you like there's the general entrepreneurship dynamics, and then of course the low hanging fruit, of course, is the fact that I'm doing a faith based app. It requires me to dig deep and really kind of live out the mission that I want to help others achieve. And so that's like a straightforward thing. But no, the actual experience of entrepreneurship, being able to offer to God the sufferings, right? So there's we touched on the reliance on him, because if you're working for someone else, like, it's pretty predictable. If I just do the tasks I'm assigned, I get the paycheck, take care of my family. Here, it's different. It's like farming, right? Maybe you have a good harvest, maybe you have a bad harvest. So there's definitely more of a reliance on God there. There is a in my case, and I'm sure a lot of entrepreneurs have go through the decision of, do I pursue, maybe you're on a track, maybe you have a certain prestige track that's like low risk, or you do the vision and mission you're called to do, and maybe you have naysayers, maybe you have people looking at you funny who are like embarrassed, like, is really you're choosing this path?
Mhm.
And maybe there's kind of shame and different things thrown your way. One of the signs of increased spiritual maturity, and it's a goal to strive for, is that, do I prefer humiliation over praise?
Mm.
And that hit me when I first read that. I was like, wow, okay, that's next level. That's like, right, that's not level one. That's some higher level stuff. And so if someone listening to this has faced that kind of criticism, consider that you have a strange kind of grace there, that you can embrace that preference for humiliation and unite that to the Lord, who is mocked, treated as a joke, even though in reality, right? I mean, Christ is the greatest, but so there's opportunity there from a psychological ego perspective. There's, so I'd say that it's the providence and the embrace of, identity challenge, reputation, whatever it is, but leaning into the courage and fortitude. Like, if you've prayed about this and you truly believe you're acting in God's will, then these are brilliant tests of faith. They're not as intense as like Abraham being asked to sacrifice his son, but God grants us those graces, those tests, that we could exercise the virtue. Because look, the more we advance in this life, the less we have to do in purgatory. And my understanding is, in purgatory, it's going to be a lot less pleasant. So it's
Yeah.
good that we're getting these graces here.
That's an interesting point. I guess I think the conviction piece is the hard part for me because it's usually around trying to understand, like, am I doing the right thing? I have conviction that I'm kind of in the right mission thing, but it's like the strategies, the things I choose, are those the right thing to really run 100 miles an hour towards? And I think we should do that, but we should also maintain the mentality and the openness that at any given time, God could just take this completely away.
Yeah.
There's a great example of this with Tim Klimkowski. He was on the pod recently, and if anybody who doesn't know, he did a lot of things. Among other things, he was the CEO at one point of for the Eucharistic Congress, National Eucharistic Congress, and he helped lead that. But his journey had a point where he was doing really well. He had his own thing going, and then COVID came and literally wiped it all away. He was like
Mm,
half a month away from not being able to make rent, and then
yeah.
ended up landing a job with the diocese. So it's like he said, sometimes God sends a flood to destroy things to prepare you for the next. So as long as you have conviction that you're doing God's will and you're running with the understanding that, yeah, if you get clotheslined all of a sudden and God's like, hey, something new is around the corner, you have to be, as much as possible, willing to accept that. It's not easy, but really take the mentality that if this ends, my identity is not tied to it, because my identity is tied towards being an instrument of God. So this has been great. I think let's wrap up with a few rapid fire items, and then
Uh-huh.
we'll call it a day. So first one is, what is your favorite scripture, or I guess holy reading that specifically speaks to you as an entrepreneur?
You're going to hate me with this. I'm going to lead with the caveat that I'm terrible at the favorites. And actually, even as I say this, I think about like what was trending. Like, you know how Jordan Peterson, they asked, "Do you believe in God?" And he just refuses. Like, well, what do you mean? And well, I'm sorry.
I
Like, what do
hate
you mean,
these
my
answers. I
favorite?
hate these answers.
Did Jesus have a favorite? If you ask Jesus, what was his favorite? So anyway, that's where my brain goes. But for me, look, I say different seasons of life, it'll cycle. So I'd say the thing that's been in the last year that's been powerful is Jesus' silence when being rebuked, before Pilate and all these false accusations, and he didn't defend himself. He didn't step in and explain. So, whatever part of the gospel that was, that's been a helpful image.
Oh, that's a really good one.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. That's quite interesting. Not heard that one before. And by the way, it doesn't have to be favorite. It can just be among the top, okay? Because I'm also like that. I hate having to say this is my definitive favorite because there's so many good things. Okay, next one. Top entrepreneur and why?
You know what? I'm gonna go with my co-founder Nathan Pinto. He's launched a couple businesses, has the Catholic spirit, the grit. I just enjoy working with him and assist him, and yeah, really like looks at, especially when you find a co-founder, there can always be the risks of ego clashes, stuff like that, versus objective like strengths, weaknesses, and let's do this. I'll go with my homie Nathan Pinto.
That's amazing. It's a blessing to be able to have that. And then top saint or one of your favorite saints and why?
Yeah, well, I'll mention two. So Saint Joseph, I mean, I'm actually in the middle of the consecration of Saint Joseph.
Amazing.
That's just life changing. I mean, I grew up without a father, but ironically, right? Okay, so brief aside, I grew up without a father. Now, single parent, single mother household. Probabilities suggest you're going to end up in bad situations. You're not going to, whether it's like you get into like drugs abuse or failing, whatever, right? The outcomes aren't typically good from a statistics standpoint, but somehow God kept me scathed clean. I didn't really, fit those statistics. So I always wondered why, how, like what kind of grace has God given me? Well, turns out my birthday is on St. Joseph the Worker Day, and I grew up in St. Joseph County. I grew up in St. Joseph, and then St. Joseph, I've had other experiences with him in the last year since I started actually kind of devotionally developing a relationship with him. And so, well, yeah, I didn't have a father, but St. Joseph was kind of there behind the scenes making things happen. So yeah, I'd say for sure I got to go with St. Joseph right now.
That's amazing. That's a great selection. You can never go wrong with Saint Joseph. Do you have a secondary though?
But I mean, I always connected with Opus Dei, even when I was in New York City, the headquarters there. So
Yeah,
St. Jose Maria Escriva,
he's
I mean,
awesome.
habits, all these little incremental, like, he would be a habits guy, man. He could be a holy habits guy.
He'd be your main brand ambassador
Yeah.
in the modern era. All right, and then your favorite or one of your favorite devotions and why?
I think whether devotion or practice, I think the daily examine is just so essential every single day. Even I first kind of got up to speed with Harry Kramer, Catholic guy. He's at Kellogg. He's founder of Madison Dearborn Partners. So super successful private equity. He said, man, for 20 years straight, daily examine, that's the key. And when he said that, I'm like, okay, I took it seriously. And yeah, now I got my streak on holy habits. It is the way for sure. It's probably the top thing I'd recommend to anybody to implement right away, the daily examine.
Awesome, man. Well, this has been a really great episode. I really appreciate you taking the time to be able to explain these things and research how this works because you've got such a deep knowledge of the faith. It's really great to be able to tie it to the entrepreneurship side of things. This is again always what we're trying to do. It's hard to find these direct connections because a lot of times it just feels more of like a personal life thing. But as you pointed out, like there is no separation, right? This is our personal decisions have eternal consequences, whether we're making those decisions politically or at work, right? So I appreciate you coming on. Where should people reach out to you? Any plugs, asks? I mean, obviously check out the Holy Habits app, but anything you want to offer people?
Yeah, go to the App Store, Holy Habits or holyhabits.app. If you just generally want to be connected, go on Twitter or X at Drago Dimitrov. Thank you. Yeah, we have fun on there. Yeah, I'd say those are the two main things. I have a Substack as well, but you could find the link in the Twitter and
yeah.
yeah.
I'll throw it all in the description, man. But it's been a pleasure having you on. We'll have to do this again. Thanks so much.
Thank you. God bless you, Silas.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this conversation and want to meet other Catholic entrepreneurs just like Drago to build alongside and to have camaraderie with, apply to join our paid community, the Catholic Founders Guild. Drago is actually a member, so you kind of get an idea of the type of person that we do have in there. We host regular meetups online and in person to learn from each other, help each other, and to do business with each other. It's $10 a month or $100 a year, so literally anybody can afford it. We're not trying to make a bunch of money from this. We're just trying to get together a lot of Catholic entrepreneurs in one place so we can meet each other and do business and go deeper from there. To get started today, just go to our Substack and click upgrade to paid. Any tier will get you access to the community and all of the paywalled content as well. If you did enjoy this, please do also leave a 5-star review on your favorite podcast player. And finally, if you enjoy what we're putting out here, the effort we're putting into this, please share this with other Catholic entrepreneurs. The main goal here is, again, build an army of Catholic entrepreneurs who are interested in really using their skills, using their business to bring God back into the culture. That's what we're trying to do. We want to share the lessons that we've learned with everybody else so we can do this together and rebuild the kingdom of God. All right, thank you guys so much. We'll see you next week. God bless.